Mark, I don't know if you remember this, but a month or two ago, you asked a sort of throwaway question as to whether or not there's some sort of brain disorder that would make a person fearless. Do you recall this?
Fantastic. I do. I remember this well.
Yes. As it turns out, yes, there is.
Yes.
Or yes, with caveats. In fact, there are two disorders, both related to a damaged amygdala that result in sufferers exhibiting some form of what we'd recognize as fearlessness. So the first of these is called Klüver-Bucy syndrome, or, go ahead.
Before you talk about Klüver-Bucy syndrome, let's first establish that fear is a healthy response, isn't it?
Very much so. Yes. It's a thing that we need, right?
Fear. Yes.
On the surface, this may sound kind of like a superpower, this fearlessness, but as we'll see, that's definitely not the case. Fear is something that helps us get through life, and not having that because of this damage is not great for you in general.
No.
And can cause some behaviors and things like that are detrimental to the people who suffer from this lack of fear. So, Cloverbusy syndrome, or bilateral temporal lobe disorder, is a rare disorder in which a person suffers damage to both temporal lobes, which causes them to have abnormalities in memory, social and sexual functioning, and to engage in idiosyncratic behaviors. So a person with Cloverbusy will experience some of the sort of classic things that we associate with brain damage, like memory loss or difficulty processing visual information. So, just like standard stuff, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Your brain got knocked around or whatever. You have these kinds of issues. But they'll also do these idiosyncratic things, like just putting anything in their mouths. They see it. They have like the urge to pop it in their mouth, and they do.
You don't know how well you foreshadowed a later topic, but I'll just pause that right there.
Oh, okay, great. Wonderful. I look forward to how that comes back into play again. This is partly because of what's called visual agnosia, which means that you can technically see something, but you don't recognize what it is. Right? So that'll come back around again. People with Klüver-Bucy basically examine their surroundings with their mouths instead of their eyes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So when they see something
like a snake, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. They don't, when they see something, they don't necessarily recognize or process it. And so the urge to put something in their mouth is their way of actually sort of examining things the way that we would look at or touch them. Yeah. So they also experience something called hypermetamorphosis, which, despite what it sounds like, just means that they have a need to explore everything. So they're just curious about everything. They need to go touch it, figure out what's going on with it, stuff like that. They also tend to engage in extreme sexual behaviors that others would likely recognize as either dangerous or inappropriate, like, just jerking off when there's other people around, or trying to have sex with inanimate objects, stuff like that. So they lose the normal fear and anger responses that the rest of us have, but not necessarily emotions as a whole. They still have emotions, just not those ones specifically. Gotcha. Come on, buddy.
Immediately, I'm thinking back to our sexsomnia of last week.
Right, yeah.
And the number of people who got off with getting off inappropriately.
Exactly.
Because of the sexsomnia defense. I'm writing down Klüver-Bucy, is that what it's called?
It is called, Klüver-Bucy.
Gary Busey syndrome. And I'm immediately wondering if there's a legal precedent for people having quoted this.
Well, it's unlikely because this is extremely rare, like much more rare than even your sexsomnia and things like that. We're talking maybe hundreds of people have this.
And are we saying caused by damage, or are we saying viral damage? Are we saying knock to the head?
Not usually trauma. It's generally a congenital disorder. So something that wears away over time at your brain. So yeah, you're not going to get hit in the head and develop this. This is something that is deeply internal that's happening to you. which is also the same with a thing called Urbach-Weithe disease, which
I love these so much.
Again, only about 300 known cases total, so exceedingly rare, which makes it very difficult to study and fully understand because the sample size is obviously incredibly small. But on the other hand, people suffering from this do help us to try to figure out parts of the brain like the amygdala and what exactly they do, because the lack of function in them can kind of give us a sense of like, oh, so that's what the amygdala is doing up there, you know. Like, I guess that's what controls this. So the most famous example of Urbach-Weithe is a woman known as SM in the medical literature. SM could remember experiencing fear as a kid, but by the age of 10, that response was just completely gone. So like I said, these are like degenerative congenital disorders that happen. So it turns out that the disorder progressively destroys the amygdala, which, to very much oversimplify, seems to be the part of the brain most responsible for the basic fear response. Now, researchers will point out that very little in the brain is up to just one part and everything is interconnected. So it's not quite that simple. But in these disorders that cause so-called fearlessness, destruction of the amygdala is known to be like the main cause for it. So like sufferers of Klüver-Bucy, SM isn't emotionless, but people with the disease tend to have trouble reading emotions in other people's expressions. So they can express emotion fine, but they look at you and they're not entirely sure what emotion you're expressing, which makes sense, right? With the like idea that you're visually seeing things, but you're not processing them, right? And in the face of things that would scare most people, she'd become quite excited or amused. She doesn't experience fear, but she experiences the interest, the excitement, all of that kind of stuff that comes with it. So to figure this out, they tried to trigger a fear response in her, right? So they were using things that would scare most people. They showed her horror movies like The Shining and The Blair Witch Project. And again, she was interested, but she was not scared by them. They took her to the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, which is known as one of the most haunted places in America, during their annual Halloween haunted house. So, you know, it's one of those things where you go and there's like actors that jump out at you. Yeah, exactly. Sure. I hate that shit because I'm so easily startled. And so they took her to one of those. And they brought her in with a regular crowd, right? They didn't just like send her in by herself or anything like that. They sent her in with a group of people who are the normal group of folks just attending this thing, ticket holders. And while the rest of them reacted as you'd expect in a place with a bunch of monsters jumping out of corners and screaming at you and everything, she thought it was funny. She was having a great time. She's laughing. She's like trying to pull everyone along, like, follow me, everybody, let's go. And she was so bold charging through the haunted house that reportedly she actually scared some of the actors.
Yes.
So she reversed the haunted house. They took her to an exotic pet store, and she had actually expressed something akin to a fear, like said verbally, like, I'm afraid of snakes, or I hate snakes, or something like that before going into it. But once she was inside, she was like, can I hold them? Can I touch them? Like,
can I taste them?
Yeah, right. Yeah, let me lick that snake real quick. And so they actually noticed that her condition seemed to not only prevent her from feeling fear, but caused her to actually actively go towards danger. So the things that cause fear in the rest of us just intrigued her instead. So like, what's the deal with that?
We get a close look at this bear. Wow.
Yeah. What a great bear. This is fun. But seriously, one time she was even walking home from work, and she lived in kind of like a seedy neighborhood, I guess. And she was mugged at knife point. And the mugger was so put off by her total lack of reaction to the knife at her throat, he just let her go, and she continued walking. She didn't even run. She just calmly walked away. And she continued to use that same route home despite knowing it was dangerous.
What strategy they won't teach you in self-defense classes.
Right? Just like be weirdly calm.
Ooh, it's a good knife. Wow, let me get a look at that.
Turns out mugging is a lot like quicksand. Just don't panic. Yeah. And they're gonna let you go. But what most articles about her leave out is that researchers later were able to evoke something akin to fear in her: abject panic. So she and two other sufferers of Urbach-Weithe were given carbon dioxide, which of course normally is what we exhale.
Yes.
When you inhale carbon dioxide, it gives you what we call air hunger, which is a feeling that you're being starved of oxygen and suffocating. So I'm sure, like, if you ever had the wind knocked out of you.
100%. Yes.
Yeah,
I know exactly what
right.
you mean.
And you know that feeling of just terror when that happens, right? You're just convinced you're going to die when you lose that ability to get air into your lungs. So you know that kind of panic that comes from this. That's what we're talking about here, is this sense that I can't get any air, and you know how terrifying that is. And for these fearless Klüver-Bucy sufferers, not only was it terrifying for them and causing them panic, they were more terrified than non-sufferers were. So, quote, the study found that all 3 of the patients experienced panic attacks when inhaling the gas, some feeling so anxious that they ripped the masks from their faces. In contrast, of 12 normal controls included in the study, only 3 panicked, suggesting that the Klüver-Bucy patients were more susceptible to this sort of fear. According to researchers, SM started to frantically wave her hand near the mask about 8 seconds after inhalation and then screamed for help. It felt like my throat was closing up, she told the researchers in an interview afterward. When asked how it made her feel, she replied, panic, mostly because I didn't know what the hell was going on. She described the feeling as the worst one she'd ever had and expressed surprise at her reaction because she couldn't ever remember having reacted that way before.
It's almost as though the syndrome cuts out the middle place, the middle part of healthy fear. So you've just got amusement, interest, engagement, nothing in the middle, and then abject fucking screaming GBs on the other end. That's your only spectrum. It cuts out the middle bits of the spectrum.
Do you have any sense of why this might have panicked her as opposed to the other things that they tried?
Gas, masks. Is it the mask? Is it the mask covering the face?
Not
Is it some
the mask, no.
Go on. Thrill me.
Yeah, I will. It occurred to the researchers that everything else that they'd tried to scare SM had involved external threats that had to be sensed by organs like the eyes and ears in order to be scary, which, as we know from before, not good at processing. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, is detected as a sign of threat from within the body.
That's lovely.
So the panic response this causes might actually just bypass the amygdala and rely on other parts of the brain to generate it. So when the researchers administered the carbon dioxide to the test subjects a second time, after they'd experienced how terrifying it was, the control group exhibited signs of anxiety as they were being prepped. So like if you already know, oh, God, I'm going to feel like I'm going to suffocate. Yeah, you're going to do this again. You're going to start stressing out, right? But the ones who had this disorder didn't display anxiety before it went on. They just panicked again once it was on their faces. Right. So they realized that this internal threat is definitely getting registered differently than these external threats to them. So in the study, the researchers wrote that these results are consistent with the notion that the amygdala detects potential danger in the external environment and physiologically prepares the organism to confront the threat. That's what our normal brains are doing, that the amygdala is we're looking at the information, it's coming in through the amygdala, and we are processing that there's a threat, and physiologically it is helping us to react to that. It's making us square up, it's making us, sweat, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So in other words, fearlessness comes from being totally unable to process potential threats around you, which is a terrible superpower.
It is. It's the opposite of a superpower, This feels as though it flies in the face of the idea of neuroplasticity.
How so?
Which, as I understand it, is the ability of the brain to remap those functions. So if if your motor functions get fucked up, if you're paralyzed, or if you've got limited motor functions or mobility because of brain injury or trauma, you can relearn stuff. You can remap those functions to different parts of the brain. If the amygdala is all about your threat perception and all about your healthy fear response, at least, based on this 16-minute discussion, it doesn't feel as though the brain was rerouting that shit anywhere else. It was gone.
Right. It just completely disappeared. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I assume there are some parts of the brain or some degrees of damage. Maybe there's just nowhere to reroute it. That where would it go? I mean, but the thing is that, yeah, even researchers they don't totally understand this either, right? They're not sure exactly what the amygdala is doing and then what those other parts of the brain are doing. So as I said, like, neuroscientists will say one part of the brain is not responsible for an entire function.
Yes.
Which is why you can normally reroute that, right? You can send something to some other part. So they found a way to sort of circumvent that and find a way that fear still exists, but this is sort of a perception issue that they can't get past, which I guess, like, I mean, is that different from like blindness or things like that? I don't know. Some stuff your brain just doesn't do.
I mean, you may have noticed me smiling in a knowing fashion at the beginning of this opening. A couple of bits about that really, really rang true, particularly the instinct to try and use. I'm right, story time, right?
Let's do this.
Share something.
Great.
Going back maybe a year or two before Peter was born, so we would have been in the tens, sure, right, or the late noughties. And again, in a thematic link to last week's discussion about sleep and sleep deprivation and when sleep goes bad. For reasons I'll go into another time, I would often spend 2 or 3 days awake at a time. Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the last such episodes of this, it was fucking weird. I mean, Laura was increasingly worried about my mental health and wanted me sectioned at one point because I would go for days at a time without sleeping, right?
Yep.
And during one of these episodes, I had the sun had come up, as it does inevitably every day. And I thought, right, okay. So I went to brush my teeth, okay? And we were on, this had been the second consecutive night. And I had the toothbrush in one hand. I had the toothpaste in the other hand. And to this day, I've never experienced a sensation like it. I simply didn't know what these two items were and what I had to do. I was stood in front of the bathroom mirror looking at these two things, but for the fucking life of me, I had no clue how they interacted, what their purpose was, and what I was supposed to do with them. And it was terrifying.
Yeah.
So in desperation, fucking the image is horrible. I put the tube of toothpaste into my mouth. Maybe this will work. And I put the tube of obviously Laura picks that moment to walk into the bathroom and to see me like wide-eyed in terror gazing at a toothbrush with a tube of toothpaste sticking out of my mouth.
Oh my god,
they were some fucking weird times.
Yeah.
Wow. But the instinct was maybe if
straight in the mouth.
I get it.
It almost, I feel like that's a thing we do a lot with senses. Kind of like when you're driving and if you like can't find where you're going or something, you'll turn down your music to like try to make yourself like
looking for parking space, turn it down
so
that I may see
to make
better.
You perceive like through your eyes better. Like there's something in us instinctually that says, this sense isn't working right.
Let me separate out the senses a little bit and
and I can enhance it by doing something else. So like I can that totally makes sense. And this disorder is like absolutely an element of that failure. So in a sense, this is it rerouting things elsewhere, right? These people, their perception isn't working properly through their eyes and their ears, and so they use their mouths.
Throw another sense at it, see if that works.
Yeah, maybe that might have something to do with the impulsive sexuality and things like that too. Like you're just using a different part of your body to sense everything.
Can I fuck it?
I don't know. Can I taste it?
Maybe I'll try fucking it. That would have been the next step.
The
if putting the toothpaste in my mouth didn't work. Maybe I'll just try and fuck it. Maybe that will.
Ooh, that would not have ended well.
Could have been worse.
Would have been a much worse time for Laura to walk in.
Oh yeah.